Hello, and welcome to another edition of Your Therapist Needs Therapy, the podcast where two mental health professionals talk about their mental health journey and how they navigate mental wellness while working in the mental health field. I'm your host, Jeremy Schumacher, licensed marriage and family therapist, and today I have a super exciting episode planned. Today I am joined by Dr. Christine Henry. Christine, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to geek out and chat with you.
Yeah, we were chatting just a little bit before I hit record. We have very similar interests. So the fact that we finally found each other across different states that we can chat about things we're super passionate about. I'm very excited.
Yeah, where are you located physically?
Yes, I am in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So I am
Oh,
a
okay.
Midwesterner. I know you
Yeah.
spent some time in the Midwest as well.
Yeah, I'm in Texas, but I feel like my heart is in the Midwest, and I love having clients back in the Midwest. I just feels that connection is awesome. And I
Yeah.
love SciPac because I can see clients in, at 38 states, I think now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the COVID was weird, not to jump into COVID trauma right away, but like COVID was weird because how relaxed everything got. I was still in higher
Mhm.
ed at that time when COVID hit.
Yeah.
And so it was like, right, I need to see all my students and they're not all from here. And it was like, oh, well, just see them and we'll figure it out later. And then some of those things started tightening back up. And it's like, no, we figured it out. It was working fine. Let
Mhm.
people see the providers they want to see.
Well, especially in more rural areas, they don't have specialists, to find
Right.
somebody who works with religious trauma or works with adult ADHD autism. Like that's very niche specialized thing. And not every place has a therapist who's trained in that. So
Right.
having it opened up to most of the US, like that's a cool thing for clients.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very shockingly client forward for our current medical model. Um, which is awesome. But yes, let's jump into a little bit of your background and how you ended up where you're at today. I always start with how'd you get into the mental health field?
Uh well, let me think. The high school that I went to, well, I grew up overseas and I came to the US as a teenager. And so there was a bit of a culture shock with that. And then the high school I went was a little higher SES. And I think people had a lot of mental health problems.
Hmm.
And it was interesting. Out of all my friends, I was the only one not hospitalized
Sure.
or had a suicide attempt. And so I was the one running around taking care of everybody.
Hmm.
And of course, I was like curious, like, why do people do these things and wanting to understand that? So, in high school, I knew I wanted to be a psychologist and like had this very, direct path of knowing and then love college and graduate school. So I was always kind of on this path, I think, to be a therapist.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know what we're gonna get into, so I have a hard time not jumping ahead. Talking about something like adult ADHD, talking about autism, when did you kind of figure some of that out? When did you get your diagnosis? Where does that fall in the chronological history?
Yeah. Well, this is the other thing that was so surprising to me is love learning about all these things, right? But had no clue about it for myself. What's
Mhm.
interesting is my husband was diagnosed with ADHD like when he was young, and back in the 80s, that was a big deal, right? To be
Sure.
diagnosed so early. And then both of my kids we knew were ADHD. Come to find out, you know, one's autistic and the other one has a lot of autistic traits. It's a separate thing. But so I already had an understanding this is what ADHD looks like. And I never thought about it for myself. I just knew academically I didn't feel like I was smart. I mean, I was told I'm not smart enough to go to a regular college. I had to go to community college. But I went to Purdue University. I graduated with a 393 GPA, right? Top 5%, which I thought, oh, it just must be easy, right?
Right.
But it was hyper focused superpower. And then also, I think being on Wellbutrin medicated the ADHD unbeknownst to me.
Sure.
So looking back, there was all these things, but I had no clue. I went what the tipping point was I had worked in college counseling centers for 10 years and then went into a private practice and I was messing up dealing with like client payments, cancellations, and just all the logistics with private practice, I was messing up. And I had such anxiety because I would check, make sure to click there, all this stuff, and I would still mess it up. And I had such anxiety every time I would have to do an administrative task. And I
Mhm.
couldn't figure out what was wrong. And then the practice owner sat me down. He's like, "Do you ever think that you're ADHD?" I was like, "What? No, like what? How, how would this be possible that I would grow up and not know this? And especially as a psychologist and already knowing things about ADHD with my husband and my kids. Like,
Mhm.
how is this a thing?" So then this is the nice thing about being a therapist. So many of our friends are therapists too. And so I called my friend and I was like, he's saying I'm ADHD. Do you think I'm ADHD? And he's like, "Oh, I thought you knew." I
Yeah.
was like, "What?" And then so many people were like, "Oh, yeah, I totally could see that. That's why you lose your keys all the time. That's why
Mhm.
you're 80 notes behind and you can't keep up with things and it takes you so long, all these things." So it was just mind blowing. And then so I got on ADHD meds and like
Mhm.
I didn't mess up the administrative tasks anymore.
Yeah.
And like my anxiety level has just dropped because I don't mess up those things. And it was so frustrating. I would try so hard and I would still mess up. And yeah. And then that had me reflect as like, wait, maybe I am smart. Like, for the first
Yeah.
time in my life. And then as my son was getting tested, realized I'm dyslexic. I have dysgraphia in watching him and seeing his process. And like, oh my gosh, all of these things. No wonder I thought I was stupid.
Mhm.
So yeah, it was very life changing.
Yeah. And that's fascinating. We I don't know the exact breakdown of your caseload, but I see a lot of adults where I'm the person diagnosing them with ADHD,
Yes.
and it's a lot of that like light bulb moment of like, but I did well in school, or like, but
Yeah.
I own my own business, or I make, six figures in my job. I'm doing well, but it's all these other things in their life. It's getting kids to practice on time. It's rescheduling dentist appointments. It's all this other stuff where it's like, right, in this narrow range, you're doing really well. And if you get more put on your plate, that's where the inattentiveness starts to kick in. And so understanding that, like, right, you're not bad, you're not wrong, you're not broken, you're not lazy, you're not a bad parent, like
Mhm.
gently approaching some of this stuff that they've been like grinding their gears on to figure out can be really like eye-opening for people to be like, oh, I didn't know ADHD could look like this. I thought it
Well,
was just fidgeting in class.
right. Well, and I think that's also the challenge when you're doing diagnosis is it's really important to look at what systems people have in place so their ADHD doesn't impact them. And if you're just looking at symptoms, well, you're not struggling with this, da, 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 but looking at what effort does it take for you not to struggle, right? And if we took those systems away or all of this, then you would struggle and those symptoms would be, more present. So I think it's so important for therapists to do a real thorough clinical interview to understand the life experience and not just look at symptoms because
Mhm.
often they're like, "Oh no, I can sit and focus." Well, it's something that they're interested in. And so of course they can sit and focus. It's like, "Okay,
Right.
well, how are you at putting away laundry? Do you misplace your coffee in the house?"
Yeah.
And things like
Yes.
that.
The laundry chair is the thing I talk about in therapy, and my ADHD neurodivergent folks light up with that because, like, a lot of them are visual, and so they need to see their laundry, and they struggle to organize it. And it's like, oh, I don't call mine the laundry chair, but yes, I have one. It's like, right, there we go.
Mhm.
That's what we're looking for. And I do couples therapy, so I see it a lot in the context of one person is
Yeah.
neurodivergent, one person is neurotypical, and they can't figure out why they keep butting heads. And having new language, having different language to talk about it is just a real game changer for people.
Right. And I see a lot of folks, I don't do couples, I just do the individuals, but like both partners are neurodivergent, but we have
Mhm.
different flavors.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
so
I'm
it's
excited. I'm excited to talk to you about that.
yeah, communicating and understanding each other. Like, for my husband, I would always get frustrated. Like, why can't you pick up the living room? Just, put everything in a pile and then we can figure out. And he's like, no, I don't know where they go. Things don't have a specific place. And so when we work around, we did that. He does the dishes because the dishes have a very specific place. And
Sure.
he does the laundry because it's very easy to understand where things go. The more ambiguous tasks I kind of deal with, right? Just understanding our brains and what things are just going to be super hard for him, right? That may not be so hard for me. And then I hate making phone calls
Same.
and those kind of tasks. And so it doesn't bother him as much. So he takes care of that, right? So it's
Yeah.
managing with our strengths.
Yeah, and I love the efficacy of that. I think there's a lot of good things in pop culture right now around fair play and mental load and a
Yeah.
lot of those things. But I think when you're dealing with neurodivergence, some of this is like, well, I'm not interested in fair. I'm interested in what's going to work well.
Yes.
How do we play to each person's strengths in a way that's good, tolerable to good? If we can sneak
Mhm.
out, great. That's awesome, but like that's not always possible. And so finding like the efficiency of like, right, this is a practical approach to what's going to work for everyone.
Right.
But as you've hinted at, you've got a household with a couple different neurodivergences, different neurodivergent paths in the household. What's
Mhm.
that kind of do not just for you as a parent, as a partner, as a mom, but as a practitioner looking at like, oh, this is how these things play out?
Yeah. Well, it's really a mind-blowing journey that I had with it, and like the culmination and it was like an explosion. I would say it was a big existential the biggest existential crisis I've had both personally and professionally at the same time. It still blows my mind how everything happened. I'll start with the professional and go into the personal, but I have clients who I was working with for years. They were coming in for trauma. They're doing individual therapy, group therapy, sometimes couples therapy, taking medication. They were hardworking folks, but they still had some challenges with emotional regulation and interpersonal things. And at the group practice I was at, there was a psychologist, Julia Straight, which is awesome. She was former faculty at University of Houston Clear Lake, so the academic background. And she came to the practice and was doing assessments and really started getting specialized knowledge in autism assessments and how it looks in females. And so, in talking with her with some of my clients, she's like, maybe you should test them, get them tested for autism. And I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense with this client. And so I sent them, and sure enough, yeah, autism or
Mhm.
ADHD autism or trauma and autism. And then I started looking at reading literature. I'm like, oh my gosh, this isn't trauma. This is autism. And she was taking insurance. So it was really affordable for clients to go get tested, luckily. And
Yeah.
so I sent a lot of my clients to her, and every time, yes, yes, yes. And the practice owner was like, wait, how is this even possible that you have so many clients that are autistic or ADHD or both? I think also, side note, is because I had a therapy dog, and like neurodivergent folks, some of us, some flavors of us love pets. And so I think
Yeah.
that's also how I got so many on my caseload. Plus, being neurodivergent, I speak the language. And
Hmm.
so they connect with me, I connect with them. Um, but so at the same time that this was happening, I mean, I was just like, oh my gosh, why wasn't I taught this in graduate school? And it's because I worked with adults. So I'm not going to work with autistic folks, right? Or
Right.
ADHD, like they'll be diagnosed, so had zero training in it. But at the same time, my daughter was struggling and we knew she was ADHD and she was in a gifted and talented academy.
Hmm.
She was struggling socially, but not academically. And so they wouldn't test her because of that, which sucked. School wouldn't
Yeah.
test her. And then after having all this knowledge, was like, maybe she's autistic, right? And we had tried many therapists and she got diagnosed with ODD, which didn't feel
Hmm.
like it fit to me. And then, so I went to her favorite teacher and I was like, I think she's autistic. And she's like, I've been a teacher for 20 years. This isn't autism. She just needs discipline. I was just like, it hurt my heart. I was like, what? And this teacher allowed Serenity to sit under her desk during class every day
Hmm.
or sit in the back of the classroom on a beanbag and like gave her all these great accommodations, which is why she was thriving in that class.
Sure. Yeah.
She's like, No, this is just gifted quirkiness. What? You know?
Which TikTok would say is a clear indicator of autism.
Oh, but I was so mad, so mad. And so we paid thousands of dollars to get
Mhm.
an evaluation, and sure enough, autism. And then so this is going on it with my daughter. This is going on with my clients, and then I start learning more. I'm like, wait a minute, my husband's autistic. It's so clear. How was this missed? And like, oh, my sister has so many traits. My niece and nephew, on my husband's side, definitely his mom, his sister, his nephew, and my dad, we always thought was a narcissist. Turns out he's probably autistic, maybe both.
Yeah.
But, you know, and then you feel like you're going crazy in some way. It's like, oh my gosh, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is my clients experience that too, right?
Mhm.
That they start seeing it everywhere. I saw a meme and it fits so true. It's like neurodivergent people travel in packs. So if you look around and you notice people around you are neurodivergent, you're probably neurodivergent too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I tell that to people all the time. Neurodivergent brains find each other.
Yeah.
And so whether it's friend group or therapists, like the number I had that too. Like maybe I'm overdiagnosing this. Maybe I'm looking for it too much
Right.
because a lot of my people have ADHD all of a sudden. And it's like, right, they're finding you something on my website, something on my YouTube channel. Like they're picking up that, oh, this brain, this brain does things differently. Let's go see him.
Yeah. Well, and then some of my psychologist colleagues, were saying the same thing. Like, this is you projecting, this is not true. But when I was at the group practice, I was not the one diagnosing the clients. That
Yeah.
and it was a full neuropsych battery, which I don't think you need to have to diagnose. But like for the sake of thoroughness, it was a different provider diagnosing. It wasn't me.
Hmm.
But yeah, I went back into therapy because am I being unethical? Because I had a colleague say, you are being unethical. You are not qualified to diagnose this, despite taking tons of trainings,
Hmm.
and sitting down with Julia and like, tell me how this person diagnosed autistic. Help me understand. No, you're being unethical, right? And then after doing therapy, continuing trainings, I'm like, no, they are operating out of outdated information.
Right.
And I'm hopeful maybe in the next 5 years, more therapists will get on board. And in my experience, there are some psychologists, people who are doing testing who are affirming and are knowledgeable, but I don't know. There's so many psychologists holding on to this is what I was trained, and they're not adapting. I find I've been connecting more with master's level folks. I don't know
Yeah.
what that is. I do have some psychologist friends who are on board, but it feels like we're slower
Yeah.
to to get on board with the neurodiversity movement.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think it's the more I dig in, I find myself somewhere in between because I do have some pushback to the TikTok crowd. The if you like chicken nuggets, you're autistic, like some
Yeah.
of that stuff. I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, but this could get harmful that we're taking away resources from people who need them.
Mhm.
But also, I have a hard time ascribing to the very rigid diagnostic tools that a lot of people who've been out in practice for 15,
Right.
20 years, I've been doing therapy for 15 years now. Like, gang, we can't be citing stuff pre 2000. Like, that's
Yes.
old, outdated information. Like, if
Yeah.
you aren't up to date on it, like, it's a fast moving field.
Mhm.
Neuroscience has changed it, the way we study it and understand it. So I hold grace for both sides of it. I think that it's hard to stay up to date, but if you're diagnosing, you kind of have to. That's part of
Yes.
your job.
Yes. Yeah. Even if you don't do testing, having an understanding of how it can look, because I agree, again, self-diagnosis, I believe, is valid, but having a therapist to help tease out things,
Hmm.
and like, oh, you think it's autism, but it's trauma. What's been interesting is I've had a couple times where people have taken on this test. They think it's autism. You dig deep, it's religious trauma.
Hmm.
And it's just like, they have the concerns for masking, and they feel like they don't fit in. It's because they don't have the same belief systems of that group anymore,
Right.
and they feel disconnected or don't know social cues. Like, there's all of these things that can look like autism, And sometimes it can be both, right?
Right.
But yeah, I agree. I think
Yeah.
it's helpful if you have a therapist that can help you like, oh yeah, autistics tend to, you know, think that way, feel that way, but people who have trauma also have
Right.
similar things.
Well, and religious trauma gets hard because if they grow up in it, then there might be some developmental delays from
Yes.
being either emotionally or intellectually held back for specific reasons, or I talk about spiritual bypassing a lot. And so it's one of those things where it's like, right, you didn't learn how to manage your emotions.
Yeah.
Does that mean emotional dysregulation on the autism spectrum somewhere, or is that really just trauma, or is that
Right.
so it is difficult, I think, to tease some of that out. And I don't know what it's like in your area. I'm in the Midwest. I'm the only person in my state who has any religious trauma training. Like,
Mhm.
that's still very new and niche as people are leaving the church
Yeah.
in droves. So it's diagnostically it's tough, and our research is limited around what it looks like for females, what it looks like for people of color. Like,
Right.
a lot of our research is still based on white males. So
Right.
working through that, reading new research, staying on top of what's been verified and what's needs to get run back and tested again. Like, some of that stuff is, and that's where you see so many people in their 30s or 40s who have not avoided, who haven't gotten the correct diagnosis for so long because they get a personality disorder at a young age, or they get,
Yes.
something else that, oh, they're narcissistic, they're borderline. And it's like, oh, well, no, there's a lot more underneath that.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, a lot of people with religious trauma don't come to therapy for religious trauma.
Right.
They come for anxiety, depression or whatever. And then you dig deep and they're always like, oh, well, it's not, I don't think about these things. I'm like, yeah, but it's running in the background and it's impacting how you think about things. And so, yeah, that's
Yeah.
sometimes hard to, yeah, even though you left the church 5 years ago,
Mhm.
those ways of thinking are still there. And yeah, getting
Yeah.
people to understand that impact.
I got diagnosed with ADHD when I was in my post grad. So just like my last semester of schooling, really useful time. Um, but the way I re- relate to ADHD, my own ADHD, is a lot different after leaving the church and deconstructing my
Mm,
faith. Because like I didn't realize how much I was disconnected from my own body, and that was very much my
yeah.
own religious stuff. And then as I started to do some of that healing, was like, oh, that's what it feels like to be regulated. Like, I just had no
Mm,
concept of that. And so then it kind of made me reevaluate and relearn a lot of stuff related to my own ADHD, where I could actually get in tune with my body in a way that when I was still conservative religious, like, just didn't make sense to me.
mhm. Yeah, it's interesting how they intertwine,
Mhm.
and when diagnosing folks, like some autistics, you who have religious trauma too, you ask about social things, and it's like, well, there's a built-in community. So yeah, they were always invited to birthday parties. They always
Yeah.
had friends, right? And so it can make it hard to notice differences in that context.
Right. Yeah, a lot of the black and white thinking that I see with ADHD, like, that's built into fundamentalist religions. Like, there's
Yeah.
a right way to do things, there's a wrong way to do things. And that's functional
Hmm.
in a way. For those who are listening, I made such a face when I said that word. It helps people function, versus then when you're trying to grow, it's really stifling. And
Right.
so there's just this really narrow lens in which it works. But I used to work at a homeless shelter, pre ACA and everyone having insurance. When I was in grad school, I worked at a low fee clinic for people who didn't have insurance, and we had a lot of people who were in Jehovah's Witness, high control religions, basically
Mhm.
cults, because they were undiagnosed or unmedicated with a mental health issue, and the high control religion made them somewhat functional, helped them
Yeah.
hold down a job and work second shift, and like, it was okay because they had all these rules and regulations. But once they got medication, that high control religion was really unhelpful for them.
Mhm. Yeah, for me, I had always had an interest in, cults and high control groups. So had that interest, reading wise. But then when I went and I worked at college counseling centers for 10 years,
Mhm.
again, I ended up getting these clients. I get some, it's because people don't look like for what impact does religion, and I don't know why Houston is it's a hub. I think there's so many folks who've come from the evangelic groups, the
Hmm.
Jehovah's Witness, Mormons. It was interesting finding all these folks in college counseling centers, and I even had a therapy group, which was so awesome and healing for people. But yeah, they could manage somewhat in an academic environment that had a lot of struggles still.
Hmm. Yeah. What was so you said just interest in that. Did you grow up religious? Do you have some personal experience with
Yeah.
a high control religious background?
Yes. Was raised Catholic and all
Hmm.
of that. And had a lot of disillusionment when my parents got divorced and how like people who were in the church treated our family. And so that
Sure.
made me pull back from that too. And then later in life, when I experienced the significant losses, I tried turning to religion for comfort and it did nothing. Great.
Mhm.
Even I'm like, well, let me try, you know, Episcopal. Let's see if that helps. Nope. And
Yeah.
so I found Unitarian Universalist, right? Which is, as long as you're a good person and, you know,
Yeah.
um, you can believe whatever you want. You can be, atheist, agnostic, and Unitarian and very LGBTQ affirming, so it
Mhm.
really fit my beliefs. And then I connected with folks who are more like-minded, and it was just such a better fit and offered so much more comfort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I I have a funny anecdote around UU churches. I hadn't been in a church in a while, and I got my certification in religious trauma. So I was trying to like build that part of my caseload up. And um, a UU church invited me to come talk. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like, I'm going to go talk about religious trauma at a church. But I walked in, and like, there was just this flood of like somatic experiencing in my body of like, oh, I've not been in a church in a while. And like, so it was just kind of a surreal experience to be like, I know all this stuff. I help people with it. And like, here I am feeling it all. But like, yeah, really good experience. The U churches are limited in the Midwest, but they're lovely,
Yeah.
lovely places.
I think like they're limited so many places too,
Yeah.
right? And then what's interesting is usually my clients are going to them if I am working locally, and so then the dual relationship stuff is there, and so that kind of
Yeah.
limits my. I mean, I could do it, but it's easier not to have to deal with dual relationship issues to not go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's as similar to neurodivergence. I think religious trauma people tend to find each other too. Again,
Yeah,
like there's so much community that religion provides that when people leave a religion, they're looking for that community elsewhere. And so I see
yeah.
a ton of religious trauma Facebook groups, and I've learned to stop introducing myself as a religious trauma specialist because people share their religious trauma with me immediately
Mm,
upon meeting me. Um, which I'm used to with like couples therapy, but yeah, it's a little different when someone starts being like, "Oh, the nuns used to treat me like this in school," and I'm like, "We're at a comic shop. This isn't a conversation for
yes.
this
That's why
location."
when you're on an airplane, you don't ever tell people you're a therapist.
Right? Yeah. Um, so, Christine, what do you kind of do in your daily life? What's time away from therapy look like? How do you take care of your mental health? I mean, working with these cases can be um, intense early on, especially as you're figuring out the diagnosis and helping people understand it. How do you kind of take care of yourself?
Well, first, like, ADHD, autism, adult ADHD, autism, also parenting ADHD kids, PDA kids, also religious trauma stuff, like those are special interests. And so, everything I read is like I enjoy that and it's connected to that. I think the big thing I do is connect with community with that, other like-minded folks and have like a social support network, not just professionally, but personally. So I spend a lot of time on that, special interest, hyper focus stuff.
Mhm.
I'm a baker too, so I love baking. I had a side baking business for 8 years too, while I was working at college counseling centers. So that was interesting.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, I don't have much free time with, 2 kids, 5 dogs, my own private practice. So
Yeah.
free time is a very small thing right now.
Yeah. Um, what's did you have any business background? I mean, you had the side business and
No. Yeah, no. But this is, see, again, undiagnosed ADHD and not realizing there's superpowers in it. Like, oh, it's like we become the jack of all trades, I think, of like,
Mhm.
oh, this is my new hyper focus. I'm going to learn everything about that. And then now that no longer fills me up. So I'm going to change something.
Yeah.
And yeah, I had no no belief in myself to run a business either. I always thought, and people have told me like you can't even manage this when you're, working for somebody else. How are you going to do this by yourself?
Mhm.
So luckily my sister, who is has a lot more executive function than my brain does, she's kind of sat with me and helped kind of guide me and support me, really kind of help set it up. And then, I kind of am able, after she puts some systems in place, able
Yeah.
to sustain it. But it's like the creativity, I think, which is awesome. And then, you know, giving, it's up to me if how much I want to do it or how little I want to do it, like
Yeah.
all of that stuff.
Yeah, I found the business side of it to be very intimidating, and now that I've been in it for a couple of years, I'm like, I wish I would have done this a lot sooner. Um, just being able to practice authentically and run things the way I want, market.
The other thing
Oh
I
yeah.
will say is understanding my ADHD and finding accommodations for them for myself as a business owner.
Hmm.
And the one that's been most life changing for me is finding an AI software for notes. It's been
Sure.
life changing, right? I
Yeah.
used to always, I would be like 80 notes behind, would have to schedule a whole day to work on notes, spend hours trying to get started, and like, would have to do body doubling, all this severe effort to get it done. And I found a program that's HIPAA compliant. I have my clients, sign informed consents. And if people are uncomfortable, I don't use it. But it, transcribes my session, and then based on the commands, it'll generate the note for me.
Sure.
Has been life changing.
Yeah.
Life changing.
Yeah. I it's one of the few systems I don't have locked down because it is get so far behind, and then something in my brain clicks where I'm like, oh, I got to take a day to catch back up, and miserable day of just catching up on notes. And um, it's always very validating to talk to other neurodivergent therapists who are like, oh yeah, of course I'm behind on my notes.
Right. Well, and then what's horrible, I see in so many therapist groups, the shame about it. Like people like, grow up, stop being lazy. This is a
Yeah.
part of the job. Just get it done. Or well, why can't you just write it after the session? What's so
Yeah.
hard about that? Oh gosh, do you know how ableist you're being in saying that, and how the struggle is so real for so many people? That just really
Yeah.
ticks me off when I see therapists saying that.
I also find a lot of neurotypical therapists are behind on notes. So I think it's just one of those like quirky things that
Yeah.
like we've done it this way forever, even though it really doesn't
Yeah.
help our clients all that much. And it's just very much like taking the medical model and slapping it on therapy and being like, guess we're going to do that.
Right.
Um, so I think some of it is being neurodivergent, but I also like know a lot of neurodivergent folks struggle with money because it's kind of like this made up concept that doesn't make a ton of sense to their brain. That's what I find with like notes too, is like, I'm doing this because I was told I had to. My clients never want to see them. They don't care. Like, it's not about helping my clients. It's about being
Well,
compliant the way I need to do the work.
what I found though, when you talk to neurotypical, because everybody complains about being behind on notes, and then I ask, "Oh, how far are you behind?" "Oh, I have like 5 notes I need to write." I'm like, "Shut up! That is not behind. 80
Right.
notes is behind. A whole month behind, right?
Yeah.
That's significant." So
Yeah.
I do always check in when people are complaining who are neurotypical. Like, really, what are we talking about here?
Well, and you worked college counseling for a decade, you
And
said?
yeah.
Um, was your caseload not insane for that?
Uh, at the time, I worked in the lovely days of college counseling when it wasn't so hellish and the presenting concerns people had were more relationship, homesickness,
Sure.
depression, anxiety. Whereas, when I was getting out, a lot more, significant mental health concerns, and
Yeah.
then the pressure from administration to see more clients, pushing you outside of your comfort zone and even abilities as a therapist. So, uh, yeah, it was busy, but not like the crazy busy that I think
Yeah.
it has become, sadly,
Yeah.
It was a great place to work.
I worked in higher ed for 5 years, but at a D3 college. So, like, you're doing way too many things. So, I was coaching volleyball,
Yeah,
teaching 2 classes, and doing all the mental health for the student athletes, which is too much stuff.
yeah,
But yeah, that was probably the time I was worst with notes, was like, oh, I have to wrap up session. I have to get to practice. Then I ran a 2 hour practice. And then I have to do recruit emails. And then, like,
yeah.
just
The only
that
thing
was
I
the
think
worst for me.
I was better note-wise, again, I think because ADHD, because I had so many other things to do. I was doing outreach, supervision, group
Sure.
therapy, individual therapy, sometimes teaching or whatever. And so, like, that there were more deadlines. And so if I have all the free time in the world, things just don't get done.
Yeah.
Right. It's when I have that time crunch. So being in private practice on my own, it's just me, right? Like there's
Yeah.
not a lot of other things. I'm like, oh crap, I only have so much time. So
But you've used the word systems a lot, which I talk about too. Like, automate or delegate is one of my mantras for adult ADHD. And owning my own practice, like, I have Wednesdays off. Wednesdays are always my catch up day, whether it's catching up on notes or doing media stuff or whatever. I'm even terrible at doing show notes for the podcast. My media person will laugh when they hear this. Like, right, it's Tuesday night. I'm emailing Jeremy to get the notes for the podcast tomorrow. But it's one of those things where, like, that system works a lot better for me, where I have built in time to catch up
mhm,
instead of guilting and shaming and being like, in case when you're behind, just being like, no, it's fine. I built it into my system. I can catch up. I can do that
mhm,
stuff and tidy everything up. And so that works a lot better versus being at an agency where I was working 5 days a week, or working at higher ed where I was 5 days a week. And, like, again, that authenticity towards building your practice the way you want lets you do work differently. It's just me. I can run my
yeah.
practice the way I want, as neurodivergently as makes sense to my brain. And that helps me be more effective.
Yeah. Well, and going where your energy levels are, like at 2 o'clock, my focus just drops too,
Mhm.
and then also work life balance. I can pick up my kids from school.
Yep.
They don't need before care and after care and the expense of that. Get to be more present in their lives. And then I have more energy for my clients, right?
Yeah.
There's all sorts of positive benefits that I think,
Yeah.
having my own practice has enabled me.
How has it been for you as a parent? Like, I'm assuming your kids are school aged.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
My
navigating. Go ahead.
my son is 11 and then Serenity's 14.
How has navigating the school system been as a professional, but also kids who have special needs?
Yeah, it's been really frustrating because I think, I don't know. I think sometimes it's like, oh, this psychologist who's just seeing things that aren't there. And then, oh, it's this, mama bear parent who's just exaggerating things. What's been interesting is there's so different with how my son is treated versus how Serenity is treated.
Sure.
So Serenity is in the gifted program. She used to not struggle with academics, but then over time her, systems ran out
Hmm.
and so she's getting more assistance. But with Skylar, he's the more hyperactive ADHD. I do think he's got a lot of autistic traits. Um, but and with the dysgraphia and the dyslexia, academics suffers so much. So
Hmm.
people accommodate him way more than they do Serenity,
Sure.
which is really frustrating,
Yeah.
right? Um, so, and I don't know, again, maybe since he's a boy, right? Again, the difference in because Serenity is the more inattentive.
Hmm.
And so how people view them. is very different, and it's so frustrating. And
Yeah.
sometimes I have to remind Serenity teacher, she is autistic. Like
Mhm.
I got this email. Well, she was doing good. She was working with a group, but then when it came to turn in the assignment and do the work, she just put her head on her desk. And I'm like, no kidding. She's autistic. You know how much energy that took to be in
Mhm.
that group? And
Yeah.
then she was straight. I'm just like, what, why, how is this a surprise? Like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my kids are a little younger. I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and the 6-year-old just in kindergarten, like it's the first parent teacher conference. Where it's like, oh, like he's not diagnosed, but almost assuredly he has ADHD.
Mm.
Like he's tiny me, and like just the conversation that we could have then, I felt was shifting a lot. But
Yeah.
kindergarten's a different world than once he gets into higher grades, where I'm like a little more concerned about it. And Milwaukee does not have. I'm a homer. I'll speak highly of Milwaukee, but acknowledge that it does not have a lot of great resources available. And so
Mhm.
balancing private school versus public school and
Yeah.
school where he has resources available to him, like it's all just trying to give him a better experience than I had, not getting diagnosed my whole life
Hmm.
until I was almost done with school versus, right, trying to not be that overbearing parent who's like, well, my kid's got this, 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 and this, and needs this, this,
Yes.
and this.
Yes. What was funny is Serenity, one of the first teacher conferences we have, I think it was in kindergarten or first grade, and they said Serenity is a little too honest with her peers. And I was like, "What?" Because my husband and I are very blunt and we just say it how it is. And so
Hmm.
she's like, "Well," like her friends like, "Hey, do you like my drawing?" And she's like, "No, that's ugly." And so we're trying to talk to her and she's like, "You want me to lie?" Like, "What? What?" And I'm like, "Well, you
Yeah.
can say, 'Oh, you like your picture,' or 'I like the color red in that rose,' or something," right? But like how to navigate that. But yeah, my husband and I looked at him like, "Well, yeah, of course. Like we're both like this." So of course it would be something that she would have to. But
Yeah.
I think, like you said, my kids are growing up with such a different experience than my husband and myself. Like how we talk about it, we use identity first language. This is who we are, our ADHD brain. We got bumper stickers,
Yeah.
but like my son came home and he's like, "Look, guess what, Mom? There's a new kid on the bus. He's ADHD and dyslexic too." And we high fived, and like so many of his friends are also ADHD, autistic, a lot of them undiagnosed. So that's hard
Hmm.
sitting with the mom and chatting and being like, "Yeah, they do that," but just they acknowledge it and it's so different, right? It's like this is who and like Skylar come home is like, yeah, that substitute didn't even know I was neurodivergent. And you know,
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm supposed to have accommodations. I couldn't fill out that worksheet. I should have been able to do it on the computer. And so already learning to advocate for himself or working
Yeah.
on it's just so different, right? He doesn't think he's stupid or
Hmm.
he understands like it's difficult for me because this is a writing assignment. I can actually write but just not physically write.
Hmm.
It's just such a different world that they thankfully, I mean, the world still kind of sucks for neurodivergent folks, but at least
Yes.
how we talk about it as a
Yeah.
family.
Yeah, and I think I did this a lot when I worked in higher ed, where it's like you're paying for school, like you're the consumer, get the education you want out of it, and that was such a paradigm shift for a lot of kids. Where
Yep.
I think, and our kid goes to a Waldorf school, so it's different anyways. But like my
Mhm.
wife's an early childhood educator, and so we spent a lot of time figuring out like what school's going to be a good fit for him. They go outside every single day, rain, shine, snow, sleet,
Wonderful.
whatever. Like everything in his classroom is like made of wood, and it's very tactile, and like it's awesome for him. Again, we'll see what happens in the higher grades, but it's one of those things where like, right, just being aware early on and saying what's going to be a good fit for my kid. Whereas
Mhm.
I was raised very conservative fundamentalist. Of course, I went to a religious school and it
Yep.
was like, go take the chalkboard erasers out, go put the flag up, take the flag down. Like I had every extra task because I couldn't sit still and no one
Mm,
thought, oh, hey, maybe that's ADHD. It's like, oh, Jeremy gets good grades. He's 3 weeks ahead. He's fine. I was like, yeah, no, that's a totally different approach for our kid of like, he needs to get out of his desk. He needs
right.
to move around. he gets overwhelmed with really loud noises. He wants to be by himself. Like, having teachers who are aware, like, again, it's just such a weird world to be a professional and a parent, because, like, right,
Yes.
we talk about how few therapists are educated on this stuff, and then, like, trying to find teachers or, support staff who know some of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, and the counselors, it was so sad with Serenity. She's more non-binary, especially when she was in middle school. She would get misgendered all the time. And I love group therapy. I think group therapy is amazing. I have 2 groups I run, but I was like, is there any groups that you have at school for her to go in? And
Hmm.
they're like, oh yeah, we have a girls empowerment group. I was like, that sounds great. Let's do that. And then she's like, yeah, there are other kids there that have short hair too. I was like, "What? Is this like a gender non-conforming group? Like, is
Yeah.
this, so she went the first day, they did jewelry making,
Hmm.
and then the next time it was baking, and I'm like, is this how to socialize as a female group? Like, what is this crap? I was
Yeah.
so mad, and I'm like, you don't have to go, but she hated it. I'm like, you don't have to go back to that, you
Yeah.
know. But it's these counselors thinking they're being helpful, and it's like, whoa, oh, oh, yeah, it was horrible.
Yeah. And each school district is so varied too. Like,
Yes, yeah,
Milwaukee, again, is MPS, the public school system, has some strengths and has a lot of weaknesses. But you get out into the suburbs and it's like, right, there might be more resources, but
right.
there are fewer teachers, or there are fewer people who are going to make accommodations, or private schools don't need to make any accommodations. So it's like just
Yes,
balancing that, not only helping our kids advocate for themselves, but advocating within the education system for, hey, we need more support staff, or we need
right.
specific support staff.
Yeah. Well, and then I've been super frustrated that schools don't know about PDA, right? And PDA
Hmm.
is definitely, it's more in the UK and Ireland, and the research is there and not in the US. But try and give this information. So PDA, if people don't know, right, the affirming way is persistent drive for autonomy, and then the non-affirming one is pathological demand avoidance. But uh, how teachers manage it, but also as a parent, like all the parenting strategies we got for Serenity was all discipline, very consequence based.
Hmm.
Like she would struggle, she would have school refusal, struggle to get school. Like, what's the consequence for that? I'm like, what? And we took this parenting advice early on. And so we did the strict behavioral crap, which is harmful, but we took everything out of her room, and she
Hmm.
only had a mattress. And with the idea of, right, her earning back privileges, she didn't care. It made no impact. She
Yeah.
was fine with that, right? For PDA, it's like, yeah, whatever. It was total. And so we struggled so much, and all these well-meaning professionals telling us horrible advice that I'm so glad we learned correctly, because it could have so much trauma and harm, right? And
Hmm.
so discovering low demand parenting, has been life changing for our family.
Hmm.
And then helping like my clients who are parents too.
Yeah.
So much of the stress of trying to use these neurotypical parenting strategies, they don't work. And like you feel like a horrible parent,
Hmm.
especially as a therapist, like, you know, but it's going off, incorrect information.
Yeah. Yeah. And you bring up a good point, because I've had a lot of conversations with international therapists, and like just the research and the language is a lot different. Like, I say psychology is always like 20 years behind where other sciences and fields are in research, because it takes that long to go from research into usable information in the therapy or diagnostic fields. Um, but like, the United States is in a weird, quirky place because of how big pharma has been the
Yeah.
sole provider of a lot of research. Like, yes, your higher ed institutions, the Ohio States and Big Ten universities who can afford to do it, but like, otherwise it's coming from big pharma, which has really limited our access to what's going on with the brain and the development, because we're just
Mhm.
trying to medicate symptoms instead of trying to create an environment where people can thrive.
Yeah. Well, and then the people wanting to maintain those systems for financial reasons, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Versus, talking to people who have socialized healthcare, and then like the way they study it is totally different than where we're
Mhm.
approaching it from like the scarcity mindset of, well, that's going to cost a lot, or trying to help our clients navigate like who's in or out of network, or like it
Right.
doesn't matter, no one's going to take this insurance. Like,
Mhm.
so hard, especially for kids who are maybe on state insurance or whatever, where it's like,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, I
best of
mean,
luck.
that's the thing I found like, not everybody has thousands of dollars to spend on an evaluation for their kid,
Hmm.
you know? And that it's just it's so sad that the school systems aren't better equipped, right? Better trained to provide those.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's really frustrating.
Or you have one psychologist for 12
Yes.
schools.
Yes. Well, and then it ends up being students who are doing the evaluations, and then the professional just signs off on them.
Yep. Yeah. Well, this took a depressing turn.
Yeah. But
But
that's
I
the
think,
thing, like, right, for me, right, the social justice piece is what drives this for me, right? Of
mhm,
like wanting my clients to not have to go through the heartache, right? That I've gone through, you know, as an individual, as a partner, as a parent, right? As a therapist too, I work with other neurodivergent therapists and
mhm,
with them in their oh crap journey of understanding this, right? And so
yep,
I think that injustice fuels me, and I'm sure other folks too, to make changes, right? To support people
yeah,
and yeah, and educating others, right? Like I sent all this PDA information to Serenity School. Here's this new concept. I went to the head of the special ed department and I'm like, here, be aware. When a teacher's, working with a kid who's PDA, these tried and true strategies that you do will do the opposite.
right, yeah. Yeah, and I can say I don't know what everyone's experience is, but my experience with Waldorf has been really great so far in that, like, once they found out I was a therapist, I had the specialty, they're like, "Oh, our DEI board is focusing on neurodivergent this year, like, come be with us, come work with
Wow,
us, like, will you come
that's
talk to
awesome.
them?" And so again, it's the frustration of running into like, well, there are limited resources, but like it is good for trying to learn. And I think for us therapists, like looking at the systems that are in place, I'm a systems thinker coming from couples therapy background, like, right, the education system, the mental health system, the medical system, like we have, like these things aren't working to
Yeah,
benefit people.
right.
And so trying to, I think some of my clients roll their eyes when I start talking about the evils of capitalism, but like, right, you're not crazy. Like, this is a silly system. It's
Yeah.
bad on purpose so that you have to pay more out of pocket. Like, I would love to have a different answer, but like, that's the answer. Like, that's why this is so frustrating. And
Mhm.
so I do think like more people speaking out about this stuff and organizing about it, hopefully will lead to change.
Well, and I think a lot of people don't know they can ask for something different.
Hmm.
Like with Serenity, every year at the Gifted Academy, they always have like this big research project, and it was group work and all this stuff. It was like a nightmare for
Yeah.
autistic ADHD folks. And was working with a parenting coach, and they're like, "She can just not do that." It's like, what? We can say we're not. She's not going to participate in that. That's an option.
Hmm.
It's like, I know you're asking her to do this, but this does not work for her. Well, like, mind blowing to me that you could say, no, I'm not going to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I say that for school education. You're paying for it. Get the education you want. That's true for therapy too. Like, right? I'm open
Yeah.
with that with clients. Like, you can fire me. It might be worthwhile to have a conversation if you want something different. Like, I have a lot of different ways to do things, and I'm not everybody's cup of tea. I get that. So you're not going to offend me, but we can talk about what else could I do? What other ways are there for treatment? And like,
Mhm.
when you're a consumer, to say like, I'm not getting what I want out of this.
Right.
I'd like something different.
Well, and as a worker too, like asking for accommodations,
Hmm.
people don't think to ask. Like one that is a game changer for a lot of folks is just fluorescent lighting,
Hmm.
of like, can I just have, these lamps on instead? And usually people accommodate that. It's like, wow, I don't have migraines all the time, or
Right.
or having, earplugs in, just these small, small tweaks that make a huge difference, and like people can do the jobs under the right conditions,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
sometimes employers are open to it, sometimes not.
Well,
Um,
and advocacy, I think, is so important because just because autism or ADHD are the diagnosis, there might be zero overlap between how that shows up.
yeah.
Like someone who has ADHD and is an introvert looks a lot different than someone who has ADHD as an extrovert. That's not related to neurodivergence at all, but the way that it shows up looks a lot different. We talked about gender differences. And so, like, a lot of workplaces or schools might have some accommodations they've done before, so they know about them. But being able to say, hey, this is specific to me, this is what works well for me,
Mhm.
because I mean, the autism diagnosis is super wide. I mean, the spectrum
Right.
approach is very, but like ADHD is 20 symptoms, you need 6 of them. That's
Mhm.
a lot of variation within that one diagnosis for how many people could have that same diagnosis and not have any of the same symptoms.
Mhm. And I've had some clients, that have concerns in disclosing the diagnosis, understandably, but they're like, why does it matter that I'm autistic? This should be for everybody, right?
Right.
Like, having this, having this, us do this way doesn't work for anybody, right? And so I think they
Hmm.
really make a great point of
Yeah.
like, yeah, let's examine, why is this system in place, and how can it be more worker friendly, right? But like as you said, kind of a capitalist, workers don't matter in some situations, right?
Right. Yeah. And then getting people comfortable walking away from that situation or leaving, like, hey, if that's not a good fit, then we can't be revolutionaries in every aspect of our life. Sometimes it's simpler to just say, yeah, this isn't a good fit. I'm going to find something else.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, just advocating for yourself, period.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, let's talk therapy dogs real quick.
Yes, yes.
You
Therapy
said
dog.
five dogs.
Yeah, I have 5 dogs. They're all, we found them or rescued them or whatever, but my therapy dog Murphy is amazing. I got him from somebody who was rehoming them because they were traveling a lot, but
Hmm.
he grew up in a nursing home being a therapy dog, so he was already kind of socialized for that.
Sure.
And I have always known I wanted to have a therapy dog
Yeah.
forever, but it was just finding the right one. And so when I found him, it was just like all the stars aligned and everything. And I was telling the director at the counseling center, I was like, I want this therapy dog. And I kind of got dismissed, like, no, we'll see if you actually do it. Number one, ADHD, all these ideas that don't fall through. So understand that. But worked on training him for a year to do the work, and like, but there was concern in higher ed, right? Like liability is their concern.
Right.
But Hurricane Harvey happened in Houston,
Hmm.
and the devastation was so so bad. And then the director's like, hey, maybe this would be a good opportunity to bring a therapy dog on campus for this.
Hmm.
So I really believe that if that didn't happen, I don't think he would have gotten on campus. But so he and I worked that the week after Hurricane Harvey, we did outreach. We saw like over, I don't know, close to 1,000 people interacting, because I had the little clicker to see, right, if we were interacting with folks. But it
Right.
made such a huge, huge. Everybody knew Murphy, Dr. Murphy, on
Hmm.
on campus, and like people would be, their heads would be down and they would be feeling sad, and they would see him and they would just smile.
Yeah.
And it was so funny because he would be watching him and you could see his tail, like noticing it would wag a little slower when they look up. And then when they smile, they start wagging even more. And they would come and, for those few minutes, um, they would have some reprieve. We
Hmm.
also volunteered when there was a school shooting in Santa Fe, and seeing those students, they were kind of walking around like zombies, but then they would see Murphy and they would just light up and smile.
Hmm.
It was so awesome. And then and so then he was able to come with me, and he came to me work with me every day, and it was like great morale for the staff.
Yeah.
He would go to staff meetings, and it was awesome. But for the clients, for the trauma clients, it was amazing. People are like, I don't trust people. I don't want a human to touch me, but I'll take cuddles from an animal all day.
Yeah.
It really helped relax them in session. Neurodivergent folks as well. Like it was like
Mhm.
kind of a STEMmy thing too that people could do, but their
Yeah.
energy. Uh, it was amazing. And then he is like super in tune with people's emotions that when
Mhm.
people, and this wasn't anything I trained him to do, but when people were dysregulated, he would stand on them. And so it was always like a joke with clients and I that you were doing well and you were regulated when Murphy would be sitting in his bed on the floor away from you.
Mhm.
But as and it was funny as people would come into session talking about something and Murphy would be in his bed. And I'm like, I don't know if this is the meat. Like, is this really what you want to talk about? And they're
Sure.
like, no, actually, I want to talk about, moving out, blah, 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 blah. And then Murphy would stand up. I was like, oh, okay. Now we're talking about what really is bothering you.
Yeah. And what kind of dog is Murphy?
He's a miniature poodle.
Nice.
So
I have,
the little hypoallergenic too, right? Didn't
yeah.
shed.
Yeah.
So I think that was also helpful. And then he
Sure.
was manageable that I could pick him up, you
Yeah.
know.
I have a Chihuahua in the house and one Great Dane. We had her brother though too, so I had two Great Dane mixes.
Oh
And
my
so I'm hearing you say the therapy dog stands on someone, and I'm like,
goodness.
wouldn't work with my
Yeah.
120-pound dog.
But for some people, that weighted blanket of a
Right.
animal can be really regulating, right? And you can get service dogs and train them to
Hmm.
put that pressure and all of that.
Yeah.
So and he's 16 pounds. So, he's not like
Yeah.
Chihuahua size, but he's also not like significant.
Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
my Chihuahua's 14 pounds. He's a big Chihuahua.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We have a
But
Chihuahua who's I think, yeah, about that too. Yeah.
we had when I worked in higher ed, we had two comfort dogs. So not formal therapy dogs, but the comfort dogs on campus. And like just what you're
Mhm.
saying, just walk them around campus during exam week or midterms, and like
Yes.
everybody wants to come and pet them for a little bit, and just the people relax and will tell you more and start processing some things.
Mhm.
It's really wonderful.
Well, and what's interesting is when people were really dysregulated, or I was really dysregulated, he would actually have a seizure.
Sure.
And so what it looked like, and I forget the technical term, but it was like air humping, right? But it
Hmm.
would be like he would have all this energy and he didn't know how to get it out. But it would happen like a client, he's sitting in the bed, client walks in the room, and bam, he has that little seizure. And at first I thought, oh, Murphy, you don't know what you're talking about. Because the client would be like, oh, I'm fine, and then
Hmm.
30 minutes into the session, they disclose something really heavy. And they're like, Murphy knew. Murphy knew.
Yeah.
So I started trusting him over my clients as far as, how
Sure.
dysregulated that they
Yeah.
were.
Yeah. And I love using, like, because I have rescue dogs, using them as an analogy for people who have trauma of like, right, my dog needs to like go exercise, or it's
Yeah.
gonna gnaw on the couch, or like it's
Mhm.
gonna have an accident when it's not in its routine, it's not getting its normal stuff, it's not
Yeah.
getting its needs met. And so like not only the physical comfort they can provide, but also the metaphor of like, right, we understand that works for dogs, but we think that doesn't work for us humans. And like, no,
Mhm.
same, your brain works the same way.
Well, and that's why, so I do virtual therapy only because it's awesome for work-life balance and my own nervous system. I felt bad retiring Murphy,
Hmm.
but I love that my clients can have their pets in their homes and like they
Yeah.
become part of the work. They're, like a cat will jump up and I'm like, oh, what are they telling me right now?
Yeah.
And connecting and using their animals. But exactly like you're saying, when people are like, oh, I'm asking, I'm feeling sick and asking for help from someone feels horrible. And I'm like, okay, well, with your dog, when they're throwing up, do you are like, you're an idiot? Why,
Right.
no,
Yep.
you don't. Right. And so exactly what you're saying, using that relationship to help them understand, like, this is, a healthy attachment you have. And like, look how you view them. Can you have that same compassion for yourself, right? There's a great sign. It's like, I want to be the person my dog thinks I am,
Yeah. Right.
right? Of,
Yeah,
of having a different lens to look at yourself.
for sure. Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been great.
Yeah.
Uh, if people want to learn more about you, if they want to learn about your practice or see if one of the states they're in is one you cover, where do they go? Where can they find out more about you?
Yeah, my practice and website is super easy to remember. It's therapyforpetpeople.com. And then also, if you want to get hyper focused and go down a rabbit hole, I made this resource page that
Hmm.
really has everything you could want to know about adult ADHD autism, tips for like how to find motivation, sensory regulation strategies. Other cool thing, as a neurodivergent parent, there's parenting stuff, right? With that in context of like managing our own neurodivergence, our own
Hmm.
emotion regulation stuff, and like dealing with a whole neurospicy family, right? And so there's
Yeah.
like parenting stuff if you're a neurodivergent parent with neurodivergent kids.
Hmm.
Tons of information on PDA. I don't really work with PDA folks. I work with parents who have PDA kids,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah, having that in my house is a lot, and I'm still learning. Like, you talk about there's not much, especially
Right.
in what does PDA look like in adults. So I've attempted to get enough resources for that, but
Yeah.
you can spend hours and hours on that resource page, and it's all free. So
Yes. And that's how we cross paths in the first place, is
yeah,
you put up something about you. You reorganized your resources
yes,
page. And I was like, ooh, free resources for clients. Let me go
yes.
check this out, and then followed up right away. Because you have, like you said, it's very expansive, which is awesome because there's so much information to process. And again, getting it from, I'm biased, but liking to get it from a professional who's vetted
Yeah.
some of it as opposed to just on TikTok or wherever. So
Right.
yes.
Well, and there's blogs and stuff, articles, but there's also peer-reviewed journal articles. I
Yeah.
try to make it a point to have all of the information, right?
Yeah.
And then I
And
also
I
do have a religious trauma page too. It's not as ginormous, but it's still like, where can you find, support groups and just books, recommended books that
Yep.
are, vetted by professionals, all of that, that's there too.
Yeah. And from someone who works in this similar things, religious trauma, adults, neurodivergence, like, right, I loved your resources. I love the way it's laid out. I loved how much is there so that each person can kind of work through their own little rabbit holes and find what
Mhm.
relates specifically to them.
Oh, and I've also have resources on pet loss too. And so
Yes.
looking at quality of life for your pet, right, in a more quantitative way, right, that you can
Mhm.
fill out, maybe a partner and you can fill out to look at where do you think the pet is, and then based on the numbers, are they okay? Do they just need geriatric care, or should we be thinking about euthanization? All these different things to think about through all of that is in the pet loss resources. So
Yeah. Yeah. So huge shout out to the resources tab there. We'll have all that stuff linked in the show notes as well
great.
to make it easy for people to find. Christine, thanks for taking the time
Yeah.
and joining me today.
Yeah. It's been lovely geeking out with you.
Yeah, for sure. And to all our wonderful listeners, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week with another new episode. Take care, everyone.